Welcome to another episode of This Too Shall Suck podcast, where we talk about the real agree, the whole agree, and nothing but the agree. Welcome back, my loves. I am your host, Loryn Denise, and I am so happy to have you here. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm super thankful for you. And if you're listening again, welcome back. And thank you so much for continuing to join me on this journey. On today's episode, we're going to be diving into something that is near and dear to me because it's something that I have learned along this journey of grief. And I think it's important, especially during this time, for everyone to do. And it's on creating boundaries or setting boundaries for yourself and for others around you. And it's something, like I said, that I had to learn through therapy. It wasn't something that I always knew how to do. I never was a person to create boundaries because I guess I didn't know what that meant, or I felt like if I created boundaries, people would look at me a different type of way. Because let me give you some background on who Loryn Denise is. I am reformed. I am a reformed people pleaser, but I have always been a people pleaser. And maybe it's my, Libra nature, as some of my good friends who know all about that zodiac would know, wanting to please people and wanting to make sure everybody's good and make sure everyone likes me. And I want everyone to like me. And I think as I've gotten older and gone through this journey, especially, I'm not going to say I don't care, because of course you care what certain people think, but I don't care enough for it to interfere with my life anymore, because going through this journey, I've just learned so much about myself and what I can take and what I can't take. And again, I credit a lot of that to therapy, but I can't please everybody. You can literally not please everyone. And that is a hard lesson that I had to learn. And I know it sounds like an easy lesson. You may be listening like, Loryn, okay, yeah, girl, of course you can't please everybody. But that was a hard lesson for me to learn because I was such a people pleaser and I wanted to feel wanted and loved and nobody to be upset with me or to not rock any boats, right? But that was a lesson that I really struggled with and that I had to learn. And so during this journey of grief, I really learned the importance of setting boundaries and why it's so important for your mental health and for your peace and your space to create boundaries. And so that's what we're going to talk about, is creating boundaries. But I thought I would start with giving you all the, textbook definition of what boundaries are. So the textbook definition says boundaries are the guidelines you set for yourself and your relationships so that you and another person know what is acceptable within that relationships. It stems first from knowing yourself and what limits you feel are appropriate for you. This is an internal conversation, as no one else can tell you where your comfort level is. And I think that last line is super important, is that it really is an internal conversation and nobody can tell you what's comfortable for you. I am a firm believer, and again, this is something I learned along the way, that nobody can tell you how you feel. Somebody can say, I felt that you felt this way. But if someone comes back and says, well, I did not feel that way, this is how I felt, nobody can tell you about you more than you. Okay. Again, nobody can tell you about you more than you. But I will say that there's sometimes when someone's telling you about you or saying you're doing certain things or you're acting a certain way, and you have to have a kind of internal check of self. But once you do that and you, again, this goes back to you knowing yourself, you know that's not where you're at, or you're like, yeah, maybe I was tripping. I was probably tripping a little bit. Or that goes back to that conversation that we had with Justin. And he said, to have that support network to say, yo, like, yeah, maybe you were wilding or maybe you're not. I have friends who sometimes if I feel some type of way, if I had a conversation with somebody or somebody made me feel some type of way, I go to friends and I literally say, listen, Okay, I'm gonna tell you this. Tell me if I'm wilding. Or actually, I open the conversation like this. I'm like, okay, tell me if I'm wilding. But here's the story. So I tell them the story, and I want them to tell me the truth. I want them to be like, yeah, you was tripping a little bit, or okay, here's another way to see it. Because sometimes when you're in situations or you're in a space of like not wanting to see yourself, or not even not wanting to see yourself, you're just in it, you're just like in it, so you can't really see on the outside, to bring someone else in and to say, yeah, like, look at it from this perspective, maybe you were tripping. That is what is so important about having that support network. But also what's the most important is being able to self-reflect, have self-awareness and growth, and be able to check yourself when you're in the wrong, or say, no, I wasn't wrong in that situation. This is how I felt. And, whether someone chooses to acknowledge how I felt or not is not anything to do with me and everything to do with them. So I'm going to share with you guys a story, and I won't give names or like the full situation because it is a sensitive topic, and I don't want to talk about anybody, and I'm not going to talk about anybody, but it's just a situation that happened within my grieving of why and where I had to learn about creating boundaries, and why it's important that you have to create those boundaries for your own mental health. So you guys know that my dad passed away in August of 2019. So of course, the holidays are coming up right after that. We got, I guess Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. So of course, everyone knows during this time, holiday grief is a real thing. So couple holiday grief with now my dad just died and not having my mom and dad. So my feelings were all over the place. And I shared with you guys, when I realized I had to go to therapy is when I was getting frustrated with friends. Unbeknownst to them, I was getting frustrated with them, and I recognized that was a sign of grief. I never lashed out or did anything like that. I had a conversation with my friends, and I said, this is how I felt. I really felt y'all should have been here. And they, politely, again, that goes back to this support system saying, well, if that's what you wanted, you gotta tell us that, Loryn. Like, we don't know how to navigate these waters. So that's when I decided I had to go to therapy. So I go to therapy. I start therapy actually about a week or two before Thanksgiving, because I knew I had to go. I just knew I had to go. So I went to therapy, and the first day of therapy, I broke down, lost my mind. And one of the things we talked about was healthy boundaries. And she's like, well, tell me about your healthy boundaries. And y'all, I just sat there and looked at her. I was like, what? Huh? Like, girl, what are you talking about? Healthy? Why do I need to have boundaries? Boundaries for what? She got me all the way together. She said, so you just go with the flow with everything. You don't have any boundaries. You just kind of fix things. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a fixer. And yeah, if something's wrong, like, I'm the one. I'm Loryn. I am woman, hear me roar. And she was like, girl. She didn't say that, but I know that's what she wanted to say. So she started sharing with me how I needed to create healthy boundaries, first of all, with my family, because anyone who knows me knows I am super about family. I am super about my friends, because I call my friends family. Like, if you're my friend, you're my family, like, period, point blank, the end. And so she first started with my family and how I needed to create boundaries in that sense for my own peace of mind, because although my mom and dad were gone, like, now I tried to carry the brunt of my mom and dad. Like, I felt like I was now the matriarch of the family. Like, obviously not the patriarch, but like, I was the one who, if I fall, then everything else is going to fall. And that was something I really struggled with. And she helped me to understand that you have to create that boundary, to understand that everyone in your family is adults, and the people who are not adults, they are fine. And if you were to move to, I don't know, Spain tomorrow, then what's the worst that can happen? And we literally went through every scenario of what was the worst that can happen. And she's like, okay. And I'm just looking at her like, you don't see a problem with this? And she's like, okay, so what would you do? Would you move back from Spain because this one thing happened? I'm like, well, no, probably not. She's like, so why are you doing that now? Just because you're close to them? So she really really got me all the way together with that. Okay. All the way together. But the so she started with that on healthy boundaries. So that's when I realized I had to create these healthy boundaries within my family. So then, at the time, I didn't really, I started really working on that with my family and creating those healthy boundaries within myself. And it wasn't necessarily me, because I think people hear boundaries and it's like, I don't want to talk to you. You need to stay away from me. You're toxic, which people love saying something is toxic. Y'all, everything is not toxic. Stop saying something is toxic just because you don't like it. Like, it's fine. It's totally fine. Like, it's cool. But it's not a fact of like, I don't want to talk to you. Stay away from me. It's just creating those spaces of, okay, like I feel that this conversation may go to the left. And so I'm going to remove myself, or I'm going to not engage, or I'm just, going to stop and take a minute and maybe we'll come back on it, or maybe we won't, and decide like that is the healthy boundary that I need in order for my own space and peace, because I don't want to be riled up for the rest of the night. And now I got a headache, my blood pressure's up, like all these physical things, my body starts reacting physically because I did not create that healthy boundary to say that, hey, when I feel myself getting to this place, my boundary is to remove myself, or my boundary is to say, hey, like, I can feel this conversation going left. Let's go ahead, agree to disagree, or let's get off the phone, or whatever the case may be. So that was something that I started working on with my family, and not allowing certain situations to get me upset, just things like that. So I really started working on that with my family, where boundaries really became like a super, like, I was like, oh, this is what she meant when she means creating healthy boundaries. There was a couple situations over the holidays during my time of grieving, as I'm going to therapy, as I'm really trying to heal, that happened with some friends, where I felt that there was a disconnect and where we were trying to mend the situation. So that goes back to me saying, nobody can tell you about you better than you. So for example, I had a disagreement with a friend. It started as one thing and essentially ended up being another. It started with doesn't it always start with a small situation? It snowballed out of control, and we can never kind of put that snowball back together and create a snowman, if that makes sense. And so at one point, or I guess at the end, it really came about, it wasn't even about the situation anymore. What it was the lack of understanding my particular boundaries that I was creating for myself. And again, this is my interpretation, is that if I'm telling you a certain thing about me and you feel like that's not true, or you're constantly telling me, well, no, this is what you're doing. This is what you're doing. This is who you are. This is what you're doing. And I'm saying, well, that's not who I am. That's not what I'm doing. That's not what I'm saying. And you're not being open to that. Fine. We can agree to disagree. Right. I will, again, that goes back to me creating boundaries, that I will get to a point to agree to disagree. But what I will not tolerate, and I don't even say tolerate because that sounds like a terrible word, but I'm not going to tolerate you not respecting my boundaries. So if I'm coming to you to saying, you know what, this is what I did in the situation, I apologize for that. However, this is what I would like for you to acknowledge, not even apologize, just acknowledge this is how I feel. I really want you to just acknowledge that in that moment of us, in the heat of the moment, not even now, in the heat of the moment, this is how you made me feel. And I would just like you to acknowledge that maybe you made me feel that way because of the anger at that moment. And I say, I, again, understand that there was a heat of a moment. I would love for you to acknowledge it. But at the very end of the day, my biggest thing is, if we want to move forward, I believe that we can move forward in this disagreement, in this friendship. If we just understand each other's boundaries, because I will not cross your boundaries. I will not do those things to you. And so I would respect and appreciate, I would appreciate if you would respect these boundaries that I have created for myself, and you would do the same. And when you tell me, like, basically bump, like, whatever you're talking about, then that's when I realized, okay, like maybe this is not a situation that I need to be in for my own health and my own mental health, essentially, and my own physical health. Because let's be clear, like if your mental is thrown off, a lot of times it does mess with your physical. Because when I do get irritated or if I get mad, think about your physical reaction. Like if next time you get upset or irritated, like really connect with your body and how you feel. Does your chest tighten up? Does your breathing start laboring? Do you start getting a headache? Do you start feeling hot? Like really see how your body responds to when you're in those situations. And then you'll start to acknowledge the fact of I'm not going to be in these situations because my body is now reacting. And now I'm in a unhealthy space, not only mentally, but physically. And so that was something that was really important to me, is not putting myself in these unhealthy situations where you're not going to acknowledge that because we're in this moment and you're not, I don't want this moment to happen again, essentially, because it's not good for my mental health, but it's also not good for my physical health. And when you don't respect that, then I can no longer be in that situation. And why it's so important with grief is because during grief, you have so many different emotions happening. You have anger, you have sadness, you have happiness, you have motivation, you have denial, you have shock, you just have all these different emotions happening at one time. And so to have a person or persons not respect where you're at in that moment, and to kind of use this time of what's the word I'm looking for? Just this time of you expressing and feeling these different emotions, and you to say, hey, I need to create this healthy space for myself because right now I'm already not in the best place because my emotions are already all over the place. So I need to create this boundary between us and between anyone, essentially, to say, I don't want to get triggered because this is a trigger for me. So I would really appreciate if you did not like hit the grenade on like throw a grenade at this trigger and set it off, because now I'm sick. Now my chest is hurting. Now I got a headache. And now all these things are happening. And if someone doesn't respect that, then it's okay for you to walk away from the situation and not feel anything about it. But I will say that something that I felt, and that, I've read a lot about it and researched a lot about it and talked to therapists about it. A lot of times what happens is you start feeling a feeling of guilt because you're like, oh my God, did my grief do this? Am I being unreasonable? Am I being crazy because I'm hurting? Or am I being crazy because whatever, right? And that's not fair to you. That's not fair to anyone going through grief. And granted, I think that goes back to that place of self-awareness and saying, okay, in this moment, that was the grief talking. But in this moment, that was not the grief talking. At this moment, this was me, Loryn Denise, creating boundaries for myself. And so that, I don't want anyone to think that because you are grieving, you don't have a space to create boundaries for yourself. Because we all know during grief, there's so many different emotions, but that does not mean that you can't have a healthy boundary to say, hey, this is not okay because I am feeling X, Y, and Z when this happens. I am being in a very vulnerable state right now, and I have to create this space already. I have to create this space for myself because there's already so many different ups and downs and ebbs and flows and different ways that I'm going. So I have to create this space for myself. And if you are not comfortable with being in that space with me, then I am okay being comfortable without you. But I think that takes a lot of time. And I think that takes, again, for me, it took therapy to understand that that space is okay to have within yourself, because people are going to be okay. People are going to be okay whether you're there or not. And that's something I really worked through as well, that if you decide to create this boundary, a healthy boundary, and again, this is healthy boundaries. There's some unhealthy boundaries, but a healthy boundary to say, this is my threshold of whatever it is. This is my threshold. And when that threshold is met, or when I see it's crossed, then I need you to come back to this threshold and not cross it. But if you choose not to, and if you don't want to, then that's totally okay. But I'm going to just remove myself from this situation, period, because like this is my threshold and you're never going to meet it. Right? You're never going to meet the threshold because you're always going to go past it because you don't feel like it's a real thing. You don't To me, when you say like, I'm not respecting your boundaries, you're not respecting my threshold. So to me, you don't think there's a threshold. You're like, you're fine. You'll deal with it. You'll get over it. And for me, a lot of it was, I always was in a space of being the one to apologize and being the one to say, whatever, it's fine. And that goes back to that people pleasing and doing whatever I needed to do to make the situation right. Even if I didn't feel like I was the one who needed to be apologizing or to make the situation right. I do not like drama. I don't like having any type of discord in my life. Like I just don't. And maybe again, that goes back to that Libra balance thing. I just don't like it. And so I was just going to do whatever I need to do to create that balance and peace. And when I realized that creating healthy boundaries was that way to do that, game changer. Boom, 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 boom. Like seriously, like it was like a light bulb went off in my head to say, oh, well, if you just create these boundaries for yourself, you're automatically going to have like healthy relationships. And that's in any relationship. That's in a friendship. That's in, a boyfriend, girlfriendship, boyfriend, girlfriend, girlfriendship, whatever the case may be. Like, you have to create those healthy boundaries for yourself, especially during a time of grief, because you're already attempting to process so much. And so trying to process another thing on top of the feelings that you're already feeling is too much. It's enough to drive anybody insane. I understand why some people like really struggle with grief and go to, I don't want to call it the crazy house. What's the word, y'all? The mental hospital? The mental hospital. Like it's a lot. And so you have to create these moments and these spaces and these thresholds and these boundaries to say, enough is enough. I'm not going to do this. And it is what it is. Like it is what it is. So some things that can help you create or set those healthy boundaries. I just wanted to talk about some things that I learned in therapy, and that will help you all create and set those healthy boundaries, especially when you're grieving. So one of the things, or I guess the first thing, and I'm pulling this from, my notes from therapy because awesome. The first thing is to be aware of your own needs. And that goes back to that self-awareness. You really have to be in tune with yourself. And it really takes, and maybe it doesn't take a lot for some people, but for me, it took a lot with being aware of my feelings, my physical being, my spiritual being, everything. Like I really had to be in tune with myself and be aware of what my needs were in any particular moment, at any particular day, to be able to create healthy boundaries. And the second thing is to recognize which people or situations drain your energy or trigger negative emotions. That one is super important because there is certain people in my life in certain situations that literally trigger those negative emotions. I have a person who is attached to a situation in my life that it really does trigger something inside of me. And so I had to have a conversation with a friend to say, hey, and this was me creating another healthy boundary to say, can you not send me anything else from that person again? Because it really sends me to a place that I am really trying to move past. And so that was creating a healthy boundary to recognize that this particular person is attached to this situation and it triggers a negative emotion for me. So I would not like to see anything from this person again. Please and thank you. And I shared that with that person and, they totally understood and we've been fine ever since. But I had to recognize that moment and that space and time may be gone forever. And that it brings up something in me that I would rather not see in a daily basis because it takes me to a different place that I don't want to go. The third thing is it's okay to say no and without apology if it is in your best interest. So that's something I struggled with, is always saying sorry. And I still struggle with it now. I always say sorry all the time. If it's something that's out of my control, I literally, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And people they're like, please stop saying sorry. Like, girl, like, but it's okay to say no and and not to apologize. And it's just okay to say no. I literally had to learn that no is a complete sentence. And that was something that was on, I believe, my goals for 2019 and even this year, that no is a complete sentence and I don't have to say anything else after that. I mean, there you can literally put a period after no and that's it. I don't have to say, well, no, because there doesn't need to be, because it's a no. And if it's in my best interest, if it's in my mental, then it is what it is. A lot of my friends understand, and they definitely understood during the time. They would ask me to do things and I would just say, no, I'm just not in the headspace. Right. I didn't even have to say that. I could have literally said no and they would have understood, because there were some days that, yes, I wanted to go out and I wanted to be my friends. I wanted to be around people. Then there was other days when I just wanted to sit in my room because I had nothing to say and I wanted to be around no one. And I didn't feel, I just wasn't up to it. So that's really important to note, that no is a complete sentence. And if it's in your best interest, you don't have to apologize for it. Let or ask others to help without guilt. Woo! Talking to myself. So this is something I've always struggled with my whole entire life, is asking people for help. And especially during my grieving process, I never wanted to feel like I was a burden on anyone. And so some days I would literally just be in my house crying by myself for hours, and I didn't want to call anybody. I'm like, I don't want to make people sad, or I don't want to be a burden on them if they're having a good day and they're out and I'm calling them and I'm like, oh, I'm just sad because I never want to be that person. But I realized, and my best friend is a great, great example of this. I have called her so many times, and she always, I think it's God. Like, she always calls me when I'm like breaking down. Like, it never fails. Every time I'm like at the cemetery or I'm crying, she always calls. I'm like, you had a camera on me or something, girl? You watching me? Every time, like, she calls me or I call her, and I just have a moment and she's like, okay, what can I do to help? Or she's like, okay, I'm going to come over, or I'm going to bring you cupcakes, or whatever the case may be. Like, she is a wonderful prime example of that. And it's something I had to work on, is to say, hey guys, I'm really having a hard day. Like, can we just talk? And, we'll talk through it. I called my sister on Mother's Day, and we were on FaceTime for like hours, just talking and just cooking and just having a good time, because she knew I was having a hard day. Even though she's a mother, she knew I was having a hard day, but I was like, hey, I'm having a hard day. Can we just talk? And we just talked. And it's something that you definitely have to, like I said before, guilt is a thing you have to go through alone, but to at least have someone to say, hey, I'm there and I can help you, is wonderful. And you don't have to feel guilty about it, because if you have that strong support network that Justin was talking about, then they're going to be they're going to want to be there for you. You're not going to have any guilt, because they're going to be like, girl, yeah, like, I'm on the way. Like, what needs to happen? So that is something I had to work on, but now I am and that takes a lot of vulnerability as well. Let me just be clear. That takes a lot of vulnerability to say, hey, I need help. Can you help me? And not feel guilty. So that takes some time, but you definitely can get there. And I think the easiest thing to do is just be vulnerable with that support network, and you'll be more than happy to see the results that you're going to get from it. Be protective of your time and try not to overcommit yourself. Again, all of these I'm talking to myself. Let's be clear. I'm talking to myself, because I am the overcommit queen. I am constantly being like, yeah, I can do that, or I'll be there. But now, listen, COVID is ridiculous. It really is. But it has forced me into a place of thinking and sitting down and enjoying just life and not overcommitting. And it's great, because I am constantly overcommitting myself, and I was not protective of my time and my space and my energy, because I was just doing stuff just to do stuff. Or like, of course, one of the things with grief is sometimes you just want to be out and around friends and doing these things, but I was not being protective of my time, and I was constantly overcommitting. And so creating a boundaries to say, okay, like, Loryn, you've done enough. Like, all right, girl, like, you cannot overcommit, because now you're drained of energy, and who's going to fill you back up? Because you've already poured your energy out to everybody. So now what? Now you're sitting here empty, and now you thinking about your dad or your mom, and you sitting at home because now you've done all these things and you're out, and now you're at home and you're sitting in your thoughts thinking about it. So allow yourself that time, protect your energy, and stop overcommitting to everything and everyone but yourself. Remember that you are not responsible for other people's problems. Woo! Again, it's just all of these I struggle with, and that's why we had to go over them in therapy. But I am the queen of carrying everyone else's problems on my shoulders. And one of my girlfriends told me one time, like, okay, Loryn, like, that's cool that you're carrying everybody else, but who's carrying you? I was like, well, God's carrying me. And he is. Don't get me wrong, but sometimes that crown, it's heavy. Oh, it's heavy. It's heavy trying to fix everybody else. It's heavy trying to carry other people's problems. And being an extreme empath really, really, really sucks sometimes, because if somebody tells me something and they'll tell me, and now I'm carrying it, they've transferred to me and I'm carrying it, I'm trying to fix it, and I've gone into fix it mode, and what's the solution? And it's like, Lord, I'm not asking you for a solution. I'm just sharing with you what's the problem. And so that is something I had to work on, to stop trying to be a fixer and just listen sometimes, and stop trying to carry everyone's burden, because gosh, it was heavy. Woo, it was heavy. And I think there was a quote that said, just because I make it look good doesn't mean it's not heavy, or something like that. And it's the truth. Like, it's heavy trying to carry everyone else's problems and to try and make sure everyone else is good. And so that's where that me creating boundaries with my family came into play, to say, okay, like, this is what's going on, but everyone's adults. Every one of my siblings is over the age of 25. So everyone is adults, and they can figure it out, and they can handle it themselves, and they will be fine with or without you. Like, literally, I really struggle with that, but I got to that point. Advocate for yourself if you feel your boundaries have been crossed. And that's where I really advocated for myself in those couple situations where I felt like my boundaries had been crossed and you're not listening to me. And, I didn't feel heard. And I advocated for myself. And I think that was the first time I can say that I've honestly, like, really stood up for myself. And I told my therapist this. I said, I feel like I never stand up for myself. And I feel like in these moments I stood up for myself. And that's when it became an issue in these particular relationships, because I was never a person to stand up for myself in a lot of the relationships that I have. And you don't have to stand up for yourself to say, you don't have to be aggressive, but to advocate for yourself, to say, hey, like, this is my threshold. This is my feelings. And if you don't want to listen to them, then hey, I can't rock with it. And to be unapologetic about it. That goes back to, it's okay to say no without apologies for your best interest. You have to advocate for yourself and to be unapologetic about how you feel, when you feel, because you're the only one who can tell you how you feel, because you're the only one living inside of your body. That's it. Well, unless you got a baby, then, somebody live inside there. Know that boundaries are for your protection, not to punish others or push them away. And again, that goes back to, maybe for me, that people pleasing thing is to say, oh, well, I feel guilty, that maybe it was my grief. Maybe I was acting crazy. Maybe I was doing this. No, that's not the case. You can't. Grief, yes, is a tricky little son of a gun, but it's not always the answer to everything, because there's people who are angry, sad, mad all the time and go through all these things, and they may not necessarily be grieving, quote unquote, at the time. And people don't blame grief on them. Like, like, you can't say, oh, well, she was acting like that because she was grieving. Like, people don't blame stuff on people any other time. Well, let me not say any other time. A lot of the times, because of whatever. But if you're grieving, people will definitely try and blame how you're acting on grief to say that this grief is controlling you. And that is not fair at all. And that is not right. And so, again, the boundaries are for your protection, and you're not punishing or pushing anyone away by doing that. You're just saying, hey, this is my threshold. This is my place of peace and where I can handle certain things. And if you can't respect that, then I'm going to have to respectfully walk away from whatever is happening in this moment. And you're not pushing them away. You're not punishing them, saying like, F you, I hate you. That's not the case. You're just saying, hey, my mental peace is a little bit more important to me than anything else. And that's fair. It's fair to say my mental health and my physical health are more important to me than certain things right now. Be direct when expressing your needs without confrontation. And again, these are all things that I had to work on. And I've grown a lot from this because I don't like to argue. Again, that goes back to that physical feeling that comes from it. So I don't feel like arguing with you, but I can say, hey, this is how I feel. Like, I feel this way. And so in those particular situations, it may have started out with a phone call, then it started out with a text, and then it ended up with the email, taking emotions out of it. Like trying to figure out the best way to not have confrontation and to avoid confrontation and to remove my feelings from it and to be as direct to say, hey, this is how I felt. I can take responsibility in how I made you feel. However, this is just how I felt in that situation. I don't want to argue anymore. These are my boundaries, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really important, is just being calm and that goes back to that self-awareness and being able to express how you feel without getting upset and angry, because how someone else perceives certain things and takes certain things, if you're coming from a genuine place of saying, hey, this is how I feel. This situation made me feel this way, et cetera, et cetera. And if somebody takes that as, okay, whatever, then that has everything to do with them and nothing to do with you. And then the last thing is approach boundary setting with love and respect for yourself. You have to take care of you. Self, whoever self is, I want you to point at self and say, I am important and I love me and I respect myself. Because if you don't love you, if you don't respect yourself, if you don't love yourself, if you don't have boundaries, if you don't say, hey, this is okay for someone to do to me, this is okay, or this is not okay for someone to do to me, then you can't expect others to do that for you. If you don't put up these places of love and peace within yourself, then you can't expect others to do the same thing. And all of this goes back to just being kind and showing grace to yourself, really, especially during that time of grieving, because you're going to need it. And you're going to have to understand that there's going to be times where you feel like the grief is making you crazy, or you feel like it doesn't make sense, or am I reacting because of this grief, or am I whatever because of grief? And just be kind to yourself and give yourself some grace to say, okay, maybe in this moment, I was allowing grief to overtake me and to react in whatever way that it was. But also, maybe I also was just creating healthy boundaries. Did it come out properly? Maybe not. And so that's where you can go back to say, hey, I apologize. I really want to create this healthy boundary for myself. And I realize that wasn't the proper way to go about it, instead of just having a conversation with you about it. So I apologize for that. But, moving forward, I would like this to be the boundary. I would like us to respect each other's feelings when we say X, Y, and Z. And, I will do the same for you. But if you feel like that's something you cannot do, then I'm okay with not moving forward too. And truly being okay with it. Like truly in your heart of hearts being okay with it. Because that's something that I've had to do in my life during the time of grieving, especially when I was in the thick of it. It is create those healthy boundaries for myself, to be able to heal and to be able to even sit here and talk to you guys today, is because I created some healthy boundaries with the people around me. And it's just caused me to grow and caused me to give the people in my life who deserve my love and deserve my time, all of it, instead of trying to spread it so thin for people who won't even respect the person who I'm becoming and the boundaries that I'm creating for my own health, to make me a better person, essentially, for myself and to be around you. So that is it, guys. I really wanted to touch on the boundaries and tell you that it's okay to create boundaries when you're grieving. Like, it's totally fine, and you're not crazy for doing it. And love you, respect you, be kind, show yourself grace, because if you don't, who will? Oh, that's it, you guys. Thank you so much for listening to another week's episode of This Too Shall Suck podcast, where we talk about the real of grief, the whole grief, and nothing but the grief. This episode was produced by Mike Sick, and our original music is produced by Jimmy Samaj. You can follow me on social media on Instagram at TTSSpod, and you can visit my website at thistooshallsuckpodcast.com. Also, feel free to drop me a line about any questions or any topics you want to hear, or just to say what's up. If you don't have social media, which, all right, that's fine, at hello@thistooshallsuckpodcast.com. Wherever you're listening, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe, and share this podcast with someone you think it could help, especially if they're really having some struggles with creating those boundaries with those people around them. As always, I love you guys, and I'm sending you love and light in your life because you deserve it. I'll see you on the next episode. Mwah.